I'm almost as shocked as you are that we're returning to this one. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Scorn was something that kind of made me quite popular back in the day. I was the first person to get an insight on the art book and share it with you wonderful people on YouTube. Though after I looked at the art book, I guess it was more, what else was there really to look at with Scorn? The art book kind of already divulged basically everything about the game that we could really know. The big issue with Scorn was that there were pieces of the puzzle there that we could identify, just not all pieces of the puzzle were there. And so there are so many and still are so many grey areas. Now, Ebb Software since then has not really discussed any sort of mention of any new projects or any further development on Scorn, or any new projects on anything else for that matter. And granted, Ebb Software has still been somewhat advertising it on Twitter and discussing it, though, you know, given what the internet is like nowadays, things are popular for like a few days and then they instantly die. Which is a shame because I did really like Scorn, but everyone's interest in it seemed to just drop. So them being on Twitter seemed more like a futile effort if anything, especially if they're not updating the game or giving any sort of like DLC or Scorn 2. But then I woke up to this tweet by Ebb Software. As you've been unravelling the dark secrets of Scorn, what are your theories about its mysterious and morbid world? Now, this got me instantly thinking, well, is there really anything to uncover? I think we've already, as I discussed before, the pieces of the puzzle are there, just not all of the pieces. So it feels like beyond what we've already been shown, what more is there really to discuss? It's far too vague to actually put your finger on anything. And like, people have looked at it as a sort of, well, what is the allegory behind this? What does it mean? Though I particularly hate looking at things like that, because if there's no story or substance to it, then in the end it doesn't really mean anything. Meaning does have to be conveyed through a narrative. And I think that was the main problem with Scorn, it just didn't have a narrative. Or at least not any sort of full, complete one. It felt like one of those weird short films you'd find on YouTube. Though a lot more about it was revealed in the art book, which I discussed on this channel and remains my most popular video, well, by a long shot. And there was a video that did relatively well before that, which was about more the sort of themes that Scorn would be dealing with, which I got all of the lovely comments on, just because of one single stupid joke, which only one person in the entire comment section got. Shout out to you, champ. There are no chicks with dicks, only guys with tits. You see, what I'm surprised about is the fact that nobody picked up on the fact that I said that HR Giga was Swedish, when he's not, he's Swiss, he's from Switzerland. That's what you people should have been tearing out my throat for. So, looking back at Scorn, because I did quite enjoy the game, and I still do enjoy looking back at it from time to time, so I think it would be a good idea to take a look back at Scorn, look at the art book, look at what we got in game, to try actually maybe fit together a better idea of what was actually going on. So the first thing to get around is that the art book explicitly says this is not an alien world. The best thing we can infer from that is that this is on Earth. Sort of like a future Earth that's so far in the future, nothing that's happening now really matters. And of course, if it is Earth, then, well, we can clearly see that it's been reformed into something completely unrecognisable. The beauty and plant life that is our planet currently has clearly been stripped away to reveal the bare rock underneath. And so the question in everyone's mind is, how did things get like this? Why is it this way? And there are many theories as to why, but I said I think it's so far in the future that nothing beforehand really matters, and so I don't feel like we ever will get much of an answer on that one. No, and to an extent I don't think that we should. I think it's good that we leave it like that. It adds an air of mystery to it. Like, some things should be answered, some things shouldn't be answered, and I feel like how we got here maybe shouldn't be answered. And all the theories that I've seen around this, like, they seem feasible, that yeah, sure, they'd be likely, but at the same time it feels like it just doesn't fit. Any theories that kind of relate to our modern times really just don't seem to fit the aesthetic of Scorn. But we aren't here for dead ends, my boys, we're here for answers, and I'm here to provide some. So I think the best theory that tells us how this world came to be, how Scorn became Scorn, can actually be found in Cyberpunk 2077. Now, I'm not gonna pull a map part and go, oh my god guys, these games are linked. That's my game theory is Scorn guy Johnny Brassknuckles from Steampunk 1877. Now, you may think, but these two are very different in nature, and they are to an extent, but the underlying ideas behind them actually kind of rebound off of one another. If you look at it like as a sort of view of progression, then Scorn is actually the logical conclusion of Cyberpunk. So it's not hard to see how we could get from our modern society to Cyberpunk society, right? The idea that the flesh is not important and we should just replace it with machinery, like edit ourselves to be as, like whatever we want. That our will, our ego should be separate from our biological reality. Rather, our biological reality should be shaped by our own will. And this is what underpins Cyberpunk. And you can already start to see how this underpins Scorn. People want to pull away from what their reality is and make themselves into what they want to be. Though this will inevitably result in a reliance on vice, on like pleasures, which we can see throughout Cyberpunk, which then we can also see throughout Scorn. So we can see how the ideas that underpin Scorn and Cyberpunk are linked, but how does one become the other? Well, I would say the answer comes then when biological reality now clashes with your ego, because in reality you can't get over the fact that biology in many ways is superior to machines, and it's from the fact that biological organisms can do one thing that machines can't, and that is they can grow and self-replicate. And when I say self-replicate, it's not the same as machines making other machines, because that takes a conscious effort, like in the same way that, humans making machines. Rather, it's even on the cellular level, things will replicate and develop and evolve. Biology can evolve, change, and grow in ways that machines just can't. Which is why it's not hard to see that the usage of machines to turn you into what you want then has its limitations. So it's not hard to see how once the society becomes what it is in Cyberpunk, it's not hard to see how maybe in many more years, a couple centuries later, it could flip in a way that would make it so that biology, it's now more easier to use like genetic engineering or do up your biology in whatever way you wish to actually change to what you need it to be. Because while for the resource you need for machinery like metals is a finite resource, it's not so much the same with flesh. Flesh is much more easily recyclable because, you can grow it and then once it rots away, you can use it to fertilize more flesh. So now that we can see biology is already perfectly designed to self-replicate and continue in a cycle, it's not hard to see how this could be used as a much superior tool than what machinery could be used for. And so integrating your biology into the machinery makes it far superior. And we can already see how, due to wealth gaps in the story of Cyberpunk, that would then, naturally be able to transfer over into the caste system that we see in Scorn, because well, you need flesh and you need to grow it from somewhere, and so they have all these creatures like the mold men or the fleshy little choku creatures to use as these sort of ways of harvesting flesh. And furthermore, since we've already established that this was done with the intent to separate your will and ego from your biological reality, then you can already see how this is done with the idea of becoming transcendent. It goes into like the idea that they are only living for their own personal desires, which is what all like in the city of Polis, where you get all these effigies of sex and pleasure. And in the art book it revealed more about being able to transcend into other forms. So it really does seem that Scorn would be a logical conclusion from the sort of story of Cyberpunk, in fact. And so, given we're already heading to our Cyberpunk dystopia, maybe a Scorn dystopia is awaiting for the human race too. Looks like Scorn's not as strange and wacky as we may have thought. So this gives us a good insight into what the society is and how it formed and why it formed. And Pekler in the art book directly explains the sort of themes that the game wants to work with. 3 major themes that really give us an insight into effectively what I've just said, like shows us the culture that Scorn is. The first theme is about struggling with the idea of existing, that you are a thing in this world. It feels like you're not supposed to be there, this is a place so alien to you, and yet you are still there, you are that thing, which I suppose is a feeling that a lot of people have, especially, you know, it's that modern day where people feel rather, the concept of being alienated from society, really. It's that you are a part of it, but it feels alien to you. The second theme that Scorn deals with is in fact one of entropy, the idea that you are sick, fragile and vulnerable, trapped in a rotting prison, as it says. But it's the last theme that I want to look at that I think gives us the best insight into the culture of the people of Scorn and the overall like allegories and themes that it deals with. And that is one of rebirth. The idea of being reborn is more potent than being born because you change drastically and you are aware of the changes, Pekler says. I want to explore losing control of your body, so that's why the parasite exists, because it's taking control of you and all of your functions. It's this desire. If we take the parasite as a representation of our biological reality, the things that happen to us that we can't control, and our personal will as, you know, Scorn Guy, then we can see that Scorn Guy relies on the parasite to do all these things for him, but at the same time wants to be free of it. He wants to be something else. He wants his ego to transcend. And it does harm him, it does begin to kill him, but inevitably it's his desire to separate from it that does kill him in the end, and it inevitably comes back for him. In the sort of metaphysical view of it, if we start piecing this together, you can see it's a long narrative of trying to be what you're not, effectively trying to separate yourself from a wretched existence. Like, life is suffering and you have to deal with it and you'll be separate for it, and you can't be faulted for wanting to be separate from it, but in the end all attempts are futile and it will inevitably destroy you. Now, this theme and idea could have been a lot more interesting, I think, if they had, you know, expanded on it, maybe given the idea of like there were multiple endings depending on how you interacted with the things in the Scorn world, but obviously that's thinking too far ahead. Hindsight is always 2020, and in all fairness, they probably didn't have all that much resources to work with. You know, they couldn't fully complete their vision, as, you know, the art book shows. And one day I wish they do and implement a lot of these ideas that they were touching on, but never fully managed to get across in the game. Though there is a lot more to the Scorn than just its allegory. Like in the art book, one of the biggest things that I noted that we didn't get to see much, that was completely cut from the game except from one boss fight, were the homunculi, these little dwarf creatures that run around and do all their little mechanical stuff and make these little cyborg mech suits for themselves. And we only saw them in one boss fight in the game, where they were in this little farm to be squeezed out for their juice. They're basically grown in battery farms, kind of like chickens, and then squeezed out for their juice, and they use that to get high. This shows a complete lack of consideration that the Scorn people have for any sort of lesser beings. That, it's all about the self and wanting to do things for yourself and like transcend, regardless of the damage you cause to others. But these little creatures are because they're a lot more than, like, let's say the mold man. They're like the mold men who are just literally just flesh to be harvested, or the chuckies, the creator creatures, I guess as they're called, that are the little monsters that, they're just animals, really. Like, they're an amalgamation of flesh, but they're just animals. The homunculi are far more intelligent than that, and they even stage a revolution in the book. There was even a whole area of the game called the Blasted Labyrinth that was supposed to be what remained of their revolution. Now, the society in Scorn has obviously collapsed somehow. We don't really know how, and it might be linked to this revolution. Like, why would all their stuff still be lying around if it was a thing from long ago? It would probably have all cleared up by that time, and so it suggests that their whole revolution was a very recent phenomenon. The problem, of course, with trying to understand that revolution is it's kind of just mentioned and not really expanded on. There's not all that much we can derive from it because, well, it was a cut part of the game and didn't show up in it at all. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave that one to the side. One thing that does interest me quite a lot, actually, speaking of things that didn't show up, is the tower. So the Blasted Labyrinth, which, as I mentioned, didn't make it in, was supposed to be sort of on the way to the tower. It's how you'd get there. And the tower would have its own abominations in it, very similar to what we saw in the crater. However, not exactly the same. Their flesh seems a lot more rough and blackened, and their existence didn't seem as fluid as it does in the crater. And what interests me a lot about that area was, what is it? What is its purpose? We know the crater was a big factory used to harvest the flesh of the Crater Queen, but this giant creature that all the flesh is growing from, well, what was the tower used for that? And we can see earlier concepts of the tower in like much earlier promotional material for Scorn in all its concept art, but we never actually got to see the tower, which is mighty unfortunate. Sometimes I think that the Scorn developers, Ebb Software, instead of doing their idea of why don't we just put it all into one game, maybe they should have split it up into two games so that they could get more content into it. Even with all the funding for Microsoft, maybe it would have been a wise idea to have one half of the game out, see how that went for them, and then they could churn out the next half of the game. It would have allowed for a much deeper and more interesting exploration of what's actually going on here. And to me, the tower is the most interesting part of the game that we never got. I do think that there's a little bit we can, sort of grasp from it, like how it says that the tower, like it reframes the tower not as a lair but as a prison. Clearly for this giant monster here, that its flesh is being pumped through all these tubes and creates these horrific monsters. Now, what exactly was being harvested from it is completely unclear. Why would the Scorn people want to create all of these monsters? And something like this, I don't think we will get an answer on unless the Scorn devs actually do decide to take the story of Scorn further. And I would like to see them take it further. It gives me more content for my channel that people will actually watch. Maybe I'll make another shooting threat to them, and that's how I'll get them to get their asses into gear and make a second game. Look, I don't think the Scorn devs like me very much. Now, there are two more major things to ponder on when it comes to Scorn. The first is, what is this gateway? This, like, transcendent place that we want to get to. It may be linked to the fact that in Scorn it's talked about how they can transcend into other bodies, which we do see a little bit of in the game, but it seems like they want to be a lot more of a game mechanic, which never got implemented. Though more so, what's at the other end of this gateway? It seems more just transcendence of body, but more sort of mind and soul. Sort of like a nirvana, heaven, and I talked about this a little bit in a previous video of mine. But it's another one of those things where we have the pieces of the puzzle, we have the ideas of their worship of the sort of platonic form and their lack of like empathy and their desire to be more than just their biological selves. But not all of the pieces of the puzzle there are there, so we can't actually form a coherent picture of what this is supposed to be. The next is how everything collapsed. Why is it now in ruin and decay and left to rot? And I suppose there are a few theories you could have for this. It could have been linked to the revolution of the homunculi that they fought back, lost, but to some extent still caused their society to collapse, or that most of them did in fact transcend into this higher plane. Like the people of the civilization, the Scorn people, transcended and left everybody else in the dust, along with a few people still stuck in these sort of in these little cocoon things along that big wall where they're grown on. Just be left to be abandoned, rot, and die. But this is the thing, the theories are just theories, and there's very little substance to actually back anything up, which is my main problem when it comes to Scorn, which is why Scorn requires more substance to it in order for us to actually get our head around what's going on. And I think this is about the fourth time, either the third or fourth time I've said this in this video, Ebb Software really needs to make some sort of like franchise out of this. They need more Scorn content. We need like director's cut, part 2, whatever. Because really Scorn has some interesting ideas, and as I've already expressed in this video, they can get really in depth. It's just that they don't have enough substance to fully flourish. And I do really like Scorn, and I really like revisiting it in my spare time, and I don't want it to be a sacrificial lamb upon the altar of the current internet fad. But those are a few ideas that I had while revisiting Scorn. Hope you enjoyed, dear viewers, and I'll catch you next time.